Is anyone
I
else
was
coming
in
in, or are we?
once where you could divide this in
I guess
small
so, yeah.
Right.
All right, so,
I was actually getting an answer.
We're at 5:01.
all right, I think we're gonna start this up because it is, yes, please. Thank you very much. You win the animation panel, no prize. How's everyone doing today? Excellent. Hope everyone's having a good time. Thanks for being here with us at Comic Fest today. My name is TJ Shevlin. I am the publishing content specialist for Upper Deck Entertainment, so I get to work on all things comic books, and it's wonderful. I was a 2023 Eisner Awards judge, and I am the least interesting person at this table, so we are going to start to my right. Yes. Did you want me to introduce you? In fact, I'm happy to do it.
Fine. I'm Larry Houston. I was the producer director of the X-Men show, G.I. Joe, Captain Planet, a whole bunch of other shows that I had a lot of fun with. And I'm glad to be here.
I'm Buzz Dixon. I worked on G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundarr, My Little Pony to take me all the way back to Filmation Studios and the Fabulous Funnies, which was neither. But
Eric Lewald, and we're kind of connected here with Larry because we did X-Men, the animated series together. I spent a few years at Disney Afternoon, where I met my lovely wife, and started at Hanna-Barbera back in the old days in mid-'80s doing Challenge of the GoBots, which was my introduction to the world of animation.
And I'm Julia Lewald, and as Eric mentioned, got my first professional job writing for Disney Afternoon, and that was such a joy. Have since gone on to write all kinds of other things, including X-Men, the animated series, and here to talk about other fun stuff. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys for being here. So I kind of want to start a little bit. How did everybody enter into the animation industry? What was the project that got you in?
For me, it's a project that most people don't know about. It's my first job in animation was at Filmation Studios at a show called Sport Billy. It was a very weird show. Basically, it's like Felix the Cat. He has a magic bag and pulls out sports items to take out the bad guy. Because Filmation had picked up some contract from Germany to do one of their cartoon shows. So that was literally my first animation job, was Sport Billy. But luckily, once that finished, I moved on to Lone Ranger, Tarzan, and what was the other one? Oh, Flash Gordon. That was my second one, and then after that, moved over to Marvel Productions, and I worked there for like 10 years. And all of their toy shows that they turned, every toy got turned into a TV show.
Like Dino Riders.
Oh my God, everything, you know. Glowworm, Glow Friends, the ponies and everybody. But you know, the fun stuff for me was Spider-Man's Amazing Friends, because I got a chance to actually get paid to draw Spider-Man and to draw, Iceman. And I was a very subversive, because a lot of, if I ever got a chance, like if the characters went to a costume show, cameos. I would just drop everything in everywhere I could, So it was a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. Buzz, how about you?
like Larry, I got my start at Filmation Studios. The thing about Filmation was they hired only two kinds of people, those on their way in and those on their way out. I had been in the Army for 6 years. I had gotten discharged in February. I had applied to USC's film school, was accepted, but the film school wouldn't start until October. So I decided I'll come out to Los Angeles, I'll get some job at some studio as a driver in the mailroom, something like that, just to get my feet wet before school started. I started at Universal I had a list of studios, and I started at Universal Studio and worked my way down to number 98 on the list, which was Filmation Studios. And I came in to the studio, and the receptionist, I asked the receptionist, who do I see about getting a job? And they said, well, in animation or live action? Well, I didn't know anything about animation, so I said live action, you know, and she said, well, wait here a moment. She goes in the back and comes out and says, Mr. Nadell will see you. Arthur Nadell was the producer of Filmation's live action shows, and this was what was called hiatus season. There was no show in production. They had not yet begun developing shows to sell to the networks. And so he was just in the back twiddling his thumbs, and he said, yeah, anything to kill an afternoon, send him back here. And we started talking, we hit it off well, and from that I ended up writing a freelance script for them. They liked it, they offered me a job, and when October rolled around, I thought, well, I'm making too much money right now to go to school. I'll go to school next year. Next year never came.
Well, as I mentioned, Hanna-Barbera was my foot in the door back in the mid-'80s. It had just so happened, with some dumb luck, after 5 or 6 years of writing a lot of scripts and trying to work on low-budget movies that, even if they got made, didn't pay any of us anything. A neighbor said, you know, they just like tripled the order for scripts at Hanna-Barbera, all the syndication stuff where they need 65 episodes instead of 13. Do you have a script I could show my boss? So my neighbor showed his boss at Hanna-Barbera. She probably read 3 pages and said, well, yeah, he's okay, he can pitch. And that was the foot in the door, and that got me a GoBots assignment about 10 days later, and 15, 20 years of steady work after. But GoBots, I mean, Hanna-Barbera was doing all sorts of things trying to figure out the syndication market. They had kind of dominated Saturday morning at the time. Smurfs was going at 90 minutes because they were so popular. And then a friend called from Disney and said, oh, Disney's ramping up because they just bought 2 hours of the afternoon on, I think it was ABC, one of the networks, and they're gonna fill that 5 days a week with 65 episode shows. They're gonna do 5 or 6 of them. Get on over here, they're staffing up like crazy. So I moved over there, she shows up, and we have a few nice years at Disney, and when we're let loose, a Fox show comes up called Beetlejuice. They're finishing their last season there. Fox had just started, they're tiny, and they needed to get some attention, and I did a year of that, and that got me the X-Men gig, because when push came to shove and they tried to figure out who's the best tool for that job, they kind of liked the tone of my Beetlejuice scripts, so boom, there came the biggest opportunity in my career.
Not that I have a lot to add to this, but I want to do what Buzz did, because I came out here and it took, from Texas, and it took me 10 years, again, in the way days before the internet, any of that kind of instant communication, coming from Lubbock, Texas, and just, I'm gonna try and break into Hollywood. 10 years, but I say that just because if you have a passion to do that kind of thing, and you're a writer, do yourself a favor, just put something on paper, have something ready, so if an opportunity comes, you're ready to present something to excite somebody about what you want to do. 10 years, but yeah.
So one of the many things that you guys all have in common is you have written not just for Marvel animation, like Marvel Productions, but you have all written very specifically Marvel characters. Did you have a relationship with Marvel Comics before you became a professional writer, as far as being a fan?
I'm gonna start down here because it's gonna go this way, and it's gonna start ugly. And the truth is, when the call came for X-Men, the animated series, there were, again, no internet, none of that stuff. It's like, oh, Marvel, okay, yeah. So that's not Batman, that's not Wonder Woman, going down the list, who are the X-Men? And oh, that's Marvel property. So I'm being very candid here. On the writing side, many of us just did not know the property, but we were ready to dive in and learn fast.
Yeah, and even though I read some Marvel comics when I was really quite young, my interest went to we're here for Mr. Kurtzman this weekend, went to Mad Magazine, and then went off in various directions. And I gave my comic book collection to a friend when I was 12 or 13. and hadn't really thought about them that much. And then we get this phone call the Sunday night saying, would you like to come in tomorrow morning in front of Stanley and Chaim Saban and all these people and say you're going to be the one running the X-Men show from the writer's side? And I said, yeah, sure, as long as I don't have to explain who the X-Men are. And so I just nodded my head and shut up for 3 hours and listened to everybody else talk, and that I survived that meeting and was able to do the show and learned very fast from very nice collaborative people like Larry, who exactly the X-Men were. But yes, to answer your questions, no relationship to them whatsoever before the day I was hired.
I was familiar with the, is this thing on even? Yeah, I was familiar with the X-Men comics and the various Marvel characters and Batman, Superman and whatnot. When I was growing up, Superboy was my favorite comic book because, superhero comic book, because it was just so goofy. But I was mostly into dinosaur comics and war comics and Scrooge McDuck. I've got not an X-Men story, an Avengers story, because when I went over from Filmation to Ruby Spears, we ended up getting what was, in essence, the Avengers. We weren't allowed to call them the Avengers, but it was all of the individual characters. And we were putting together the show. Steve Gerber was going to be the story editor on it. And the idea was to do an hour-long show where each character had a segment, but the segments would all fit together into a bigger story, and they would all come together for the final segment to defeat whatever the menace was. And you know, this sounded like a really great idea. Steve and I and all the other writers were very excited about it. And Joe Ruby, God love him, said, yeah, and we're gonna give each Marvel superhero a funny dog as a companion. And we all laughed and said, oh, that's a great joke, Joe. It wasn't a joke. We turned this thing in at breakneck speed. We got this thing. We had to hire a special courier to fly it first class, Red Eye Express to New York to show it to the network. Steve was asked to explain the characters to Fred Silverman, who was going to buy the show. And so he's in this meeting and he decides he's going to start with the simplest character to explain, Captain America. And he says Captain America was a super soldier in World War II who was frozen and now has been thawed out, and he is a man out of time. He has World War II sensibilities, but he is in the present era. And Silverman said, you know, we ain't doing Ibsen here. So Steve said, yeah, he's got a shield and he throws it. And that was all Silverman wanted, really. Show did not sell, thank God, because funny dogs.
Not a writer, I'm just the director, so I just,
Sure.
you know, these guys gave me the gems, and so I just went ahead and directed what they gave me. So for me, I don't have any writing stories except, you know, I think I wrote two in my career. One was Spider-Man's Amazing Friends. They were trying to sell premises to NBC for the series, and they couldn't get anything through. And so I talked to the story editor at the time, which his name will pop up sooner or later in my head. And I said, I'm like 25 years old. I said, hey, can I give it a shot? He said, sure. And so I went back because I know the comic book lore. I knew there was a character made out of bees called Swarm. So I came up with this premise, submitted it, and my premise was the first one that they accepted. The second one was something with the Green Goblin. So it was like knowing the comic book lore that was like stuck in my head. I had too much of it. Helped me to sell a script, and so I got that in there.
So you really had that relationship there with Marvel Comics then.
Oh yeah.
What was some of the books that you were reading when you were growing up?
Oh, it's quite a few. I mean, it started with like some of the early Harveys, Casper, and stuff like that. Then I migrated to the Disney books and Goofy stuff, and then DC Comics, and then Marvel Comics. Like it had a progression. I've been reading books since elementary school, so all of that stuff was all up here. All of that escapist fantasy entertainment. It was like, it was like fun to read that and to grow up with that kind of literature. So when to make up that little swarm story, it's like it just seemed like a natural. You get the Spider-Man and Bee. Okay, let's have some fun with that. The other one was one G.I. Joe show called Hearts and Cannon, where I wrote a story I based the story on the old Bing Crosby, Bob Hope show, where they go here and then they go here, and so it was like based on that. They find a princess, they save her, and they got to go from point A to point B, and crap happens along the way. and so you get character moments and stuff, but that was basically it.
I think going from point A to point B and crap happens along the way is the best description of the writing process.
It sounds like what the executives wanted anyway, so pretty perfect. Did you guys find it hard having to write, especially for maybe not so much the 70s, but really the 80s and the 90s when animation is really designed to sell kids things? It's designed to sell toys, to sell cereal, and to sell games. Did you find it hard to want to be able to tell stories with substance, or did you just kind of resign yourself to saying, you know what, it's a job and I'm doing the job?
Well, for us, I think it depended upon the studio and the toy company. For us, Sunbow was financed by Hasbro, so we had like a direct line to the toy company. There wasn't any back and forth or dissension with studio, with the network, or anything like that. And basically, they felt as long as we showed the product and we didn't do a disservice to the product, that we could do pretty much anything we wanted. Quite literally, when it came to the Inhumanoids, I'll tell you that story in a moment. But they had fairly reasonable boundaries that they didn't want us to cross. And as long as we stayed within the boundaries, we had an enormous amount of freedom. If the box that the networks put us in on Saturday morning was this big, the box that Sunbow gave us was this big. And so we were relishing that freedom, that additional freedom, that even though there were boundaries, we had more freedom to do stuff than ever before. The one show that I wanted to bring up, though, Inhumanoids, the toy line flopped, and there's a variety of reasons for it. Poor design, too high priced. But the toy line flopped when we were halfway through production, and Hasbro just canceled the toy line. And they told us, we're not doing the toys anymore. And we said, well, what does that do to the series? And they said, well, we're committed to finishing the series. So basically, you guys can do whatever you want as long as we don't get a FCC complaint. Oh, really? And we just went nuts for the last 6 episodes.
Always wondered about that.
Oh yeah, we just got completely bonkers.
Eric, Julia?
I think it was it 1988 or 89 when Fox Kids sort of became a thing? Because back in the old days, it was ABC, CBS, and NBC were the 3 major networks that if you were trying to get a show on nationally, those were the 3 only places that you pitched to. And if they bought it, great. If they didn't, well, you've got three chances.
That's
and
it,
you're
yeah.
out. And then some stuff started to happen with Disney's decision to go with an afternoon block, a 2-hour afternoon block, which was, that's an interesting opportunity, an interesting proposition. And then Fox Kids, Fox Network saying, we're gonna buy up we're gonna get a bunch of syndicated stations, bring them together, and we're gonna make a network. And there had not been a successful 4th network. Dumont was the last one that tried, and that was in the 50s. So it was a real, I'm gonna say crapshoot. But the folks at Fox and Fox Kids were willing to throw the dice on some things that were not getting picked up by the other 3 networks, because they needed to make a little bit of noise and they wanted to make a mark.
Well, to answer the toy question, I always kind of disliked when somebody says, well, aren't those shows you're working kind of commercial? Aren't they just 22-minute advertisements for some product? And I said, well, it absolutely doesn't matter what you start with. If you start with an absolutely original property, if it's successful, they're going to merchandise the hell out of it. And so, chicken and egg, it doesn't matter if you're writing for talking vehicles. You're going to write just as good dialogue as if you're writing for Shakespeare characters. You're just thinking of, if you think of them as sharp adults, they're going to be sharp adults. You don't have to dumb down your characters just because they're based on a toy. I mean, which came first, Popeye or Popeye toys, or it's going to go the same way. So it never felt like a burden to me to write for toy-based characters until you had a really intrusive toy company, and they suddenly said, oh well, they have to speak like 4-year-olds and do stupid things that no human being would do. Then you had a fight, but that was not the majority of the time. That was occasionally, and then you hold your head and said, well, we'll get through this series anyway. But that was the only time it was a problem, when the toy companies thought they could tell better stories than the writers could, and they were always wrong.
Yeah.
One of the greatest TV series ever made was a primetime show called Route 66. And Route 66 came about because the creator of it, Sterling Silliphant, had tried selling a TV show that was, to be honest, a ripoff of Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And it was about two guys just drifting around the country, getting odd jobs here and there. Couldn't sell that. Chevrolet people told, I think it was CBS, we're reintroducing the Corvette. We've redesigned it. If we give you a car, can you build a show around it? And they asked Sterling Silliphant, can you build a show around the Corvette? And he thought, oh, my two guys aren't hitchhiking anymore.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, I over the years working on with all these different toy companies, I've come to believe, it's when we were doing the G.I. Joe movie, that's when it really it became very apparent to me that when they wanted to kill off Optimus Prime, they wanted to kill off Duke, and we were in a meeting with them, and we were talking about, well, if we're going to kill off Duke, what about Scarlet? She's been there. We established her for like 60 episodes or whatever it was, and she's not in the script. Where is she going to be? And we got this blank look at us. They had no idea what I was talking about, and the only thing they told us at the meeting was like, "Well, she's last year's toy model," And it really became apparent to me. These guys only sell plastic. They have no idea what the content is that's being created by the people who work on the show. And I was like, wow,
One of the dramatic mistakes that was made was they tried to introduce new characters in the movie, and they learned the hard way. The audience that pays to see the movie is paying to see the characters they love and are familiar with in a show. They do not want to see new characters in a movie. They'll be happy to look at new characters in a TV show, but not in a movie. And that was one of the big problems.
No, that seems, excuse me, that always seems to be a little bit of a struggle. On a personal note, I remember seeing Transformers the movie as a kid in the theater, and that was one of the first big childhood traumas that you have. It's that, and it's never a new story. All those kinds of things where you just realize, oh man, this is gonna stay with me forever. And on the opposite side, bringing up Duke, and this is such a really kind of like a touchstone for any kid who grew up with this period of animation. The G.I. Joe, the movie intro, might be one of the single greatest pieces of animation from any studio ever. And I can't imagine, I know going into a movie, you have to up the stakes on what you're doing, especially if it's a movie based on a cartoon you're already working on. But walk me through the mindset of putting that intro together, because it's brilliant, even still.
America. Well, when Hasbro, through Don Jarrett, who was a supervising director, through him, they told us the studio wanted an intro. And it was like myself, Boyd Kirkland, and Frank Part. They said, oh, go create an intro. And so we kind of all went away. It's like we had no direction, just make an intro. And so when I went home, I was still trying to think about what the hell is this going to be? And I happened to look on the TV. They had a news report about they were remodeling. They were doing something with the Statue of Liberty, some kind of improvements and stuff like that. I went, oh, okay, let's see. Okay, so we're going to celebrate the Statue of Liberty, and Cobra comes to F it up. All right. And I just started from there and just started creating stuff like the celebration, and then Cobra comes in and starts doing what Cobra does,
Sure.
Messing up stuff. And then you get to a certain point where it looks like the bad guys are just winning, and suddenly Major Blood gets blown out of the sky, and then behind the smoke, here's our heroes. And they, yo, Joe, and then the battle ensues.
You talking about it, it's funny. Still in my mind's eye, I can visualize all of it as you're doing it. And the song is playing in my head, and this is that moment where my wife will get mad at me because I can't remember to pick up the socks off the floor, but I can remember all of that clear as a bell. But it's please.
I just started from that point forward. There was a movie in my head. I just started drawing. There was no music.
Sure. I
was just drawing images and stuff, and I was trying to, at least in every scene, showcase at least one Joe, Joe that maybe never got a lot of screen time. Just put one, at least somewhere in one scene, have this one here,
I
this one
think
here,
the
this one here.
1.5 seconds that Major Blood is on screen in that sequence is his sum total in the movie, isn't it?
Yes.
And the nice part in the show, when the bad guy's planes got shot, you always have to show parachutes. And during the intro, I didn't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
It's like they get blown out of the sky. Well,
They're getting blown out the sky.
Yeah, they fall somewhere. We don't have to worry about it. There's no bodies, but they got taken care of.
It's all about that transition Snake Eyes trouble bubble kick is
Oh, yeah.
always my favorite.
And that was something I made up with the spur of the moment. It's like,
It's great.
Snake, okay, I can do this and fly in the camera. It's like, it was just all a movie in my head. I just started making up stuff. And I just started, it was, once I got to a certain point where it's like, okay, this is done. Okay, let's have them establish these. Let's take a bomb and blow up, the place. And so it was just a movie that was running in my head at the time. And so it was just a stream of consciousness. And my other friends, they had nothing. They didn't create anything, so they went with mine.
Was it business as usual for you guys transitioning from the animated series to the movie, or did it feel, as far as the work, much bigger?
For me, I had been directing on the syndicated series for, I don't know, about 3 or 4 years, or maybe less than that. But it gave me a lot of the working on it. I got a chance to know the characters and what they could do. Everybody had their own shtick, so that when I did the movie, I knew what everybody, their gimmicks were. So I could hook into everything everyone did, and it didn't bother me to switch over. I mean, I didn't have a switch over problem. It's like, no, I'm just having fun with it. But what I didn't realize was that when I was working on the syndicated show, when you set up a storyboard, you were lucky to get 50% of whatever you drew, because I had an idea of what the budget was, and gets overseas to Korea, and they're going, they don't have money for all this stuff. They take out 50% of whatever you drew. And so when I sent over for the intro, it came. I drew all these balloons. When it came back, they drew all the damn balloons.
Yeah.
It had everything. I was like, oh my God, look at that. They had full animation. I was like totally impressed with the dailies when they came in. I was like, now I know what it feels like to have a theatrical budget. It was so good, you know, and it felt like, I wish I kept copies of the dailies. That was actually Don Jer, which kept those, but the stuff looked really nice. I was very impressed. And then afterwards, that's when they scored the music to the images. You know,
Iconic theme there.
yeah, I think someone told me that it's the first time the bad guys had their own opening theme music, you know?
Oh, that's pretty cool, yeah. Buzz, you worked on both G.I. Joe the movie and Transformers the movie, correct?
I didn't work on Transformers the movie. I did a little bit of advisory work, for lack of a better word, on the My Little Pony movie.
Yes.
Basically saying, hey, you can stick a song in here, you know. I did the work on the G.I. Joe movie, and they liked me killing Duke so much that they decided to kill Optimus Prime to, you know, the audience for G.I. Joe was roughly 12 years of age, the target audience. And they're old enough to go to the movie theaters by themselves, and they are old enough that they can intellectually appreciate in war people get killed. And so when I suggested, if you're gonna get rid of Duke, let's let him die a heroic death. Let's let his death mean something. And so they approved that, and then we write this scene. And they liked it so much, they told the Transformers team, well, you can kill Optimus Prime, destroy him. Now, the difference between a human being and a robot is that you can smash a robot to bits and then put him back together and he's as good as new. Can't do that with a human being. Also, the Transformers audience was about 10 years of age. So a lot of them had to come to the movie with their parents. And I pity these poor parents because they are in this theater. It looks like an acid flashback. The dialogue might as well be in High Martian for all they can understand. And then all of a sudden, every kid in the theater starts screaming and crying. And they're going, what happened? What? You know?
Yeah.
Yep. So Eric and Julia, this one is going to be a little bit different, but I kind of feel like it's similar as far as having to almost, I don't want to say manage your expectations, but the X-Men, when you were working on this not only did the cartoon premiere, not only are there action figures, but the X-Men comic, X-Men issue 1, Chris Claremont and Jim Lee, best-selling book of all time, still to this day. So there are two audiences. There is the kids, teens, and adults that are already reading the comic books, and then the kids that the show is shooting for, and the teens and the adults who are reading the comic books that are coming to the show. Did you feel like you were able to serve all of them?
I'm going to pass it over, but Margaret Lesh, the president of Fox Kids, had been pushing for an X-Men show for a while, and she kept bumping up against, it's the biggest book, it's the biggest book.
Yeah.
And all three network executives just stared at her and look, biggest book means you're gonna get a couple million people that know who these guys are. Well, there are 200 million people in America. We need more like 6 or 7 to watch the show. If your show comes on, and Margaret even told this to us directly when we were developing it, 85% of your audience, not just a little, but the vast majority of your audience, young, middle, and old, are not gonna have a clue who the X-Men are, because even though they are the biggest thing in comics is such a small, or was such a small part of pop culture, that wouldn't guarantee you a successful show, much less a hit. So we were not at all writing for the comic fans other than trying to absolutely respect what's in the books. We didn't want to change the spirit, we didn't want to change the tone, we wanted to change the characters. We had no personal agenda to make it any different from the books. But at the same time, since the majority of the writers were not fans of the books, we weren't thinking, oh gee, what can we do to make the scene more exciting for the people that know the X-Men? We were just trying to think, what can make the scene more exciting? And by happenstance, that also made it most exciting for all the book fans. So we were focused, we assumed what Margaret told us to do, that we were writing for people that had no clue who the X-Men were. And so that first season, there's a lot of trying to be really careful and clear and take time to establish what this world's like, what the mutants' position is like, why the people are afraid of them, why the people want to attack them. All this setup that has been going on for 30 years in the comics, that any comics fan would know before the thing's set up. We have to make sure to layer into the first dozen stories because we couldn't count on it. Now, of course, if you ask 100 people who are the X-Men, 85% of them are going to know.
Yeah.
And it's a centerpiece. Comics are now a centerpiece of, but 32 years ago, it just was not the case. They were not the center of pop culture. And so that gives you an idea. We weren't focused on the comic book fans, but we respected them enough that we were trying to be true to the books, and that evidently grabbed everybody. And they were so surprised. We got a lot of pushback while we were writing and drawing it. So this is way too adult. We're trying to sell cereal to 9-year-olds. What are you doing with all this? These adults having relationships and killing somebody and all this dark stuff in these. I said, have you looked at the comic books the last 5 years? This is gentle compared to what's in the comics.
Yeah.
Especially at that period.
Yeah, that was about as intense a period as there was for the X-Men.
Yep.
So we weren't trying to go super adult or change things or didn't have an agenda. We were just trying to get as close to the books as we could without breaking all of the kids' TV rules.
Yeah.
And luckily we had a really great censor, which is, you'd never hear from anybody, but Avery Coburn understood and liked the books, and she let us write all these adult stories with all these adult consequences, where 9 out of 10 other censors would have said, none of that, nobody gets hurt, nobody gets shot, nobody falls in love with anybody, nobody breaks each other's heart, dumb it down, make it for 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
And we never got that note, again, thanks to Avery and thanks to Margaret.
Yeah, and when I drew the opening titles for the X-Men intro, working with Will Mineo and Rick Holberg, we knew that most people did not know who the X-Men were. So when you watch the opening, you'll see we have a lot of floating X-Men flying with a jet. And then when you cut to each individual character, you got Cyclops, you show his powers, you show Rogue, you show Wolverine. We were trying to ID these characters right from the beginning, so when you got into the show, you knew who you were looking at. You may not know the character, but at least you know, oh, there's Wolverine, the yellow costume. Okay, that's Storm, the white costume. We ID'd with the powers and the name, so that we knew we had to grab not just the comic book people, because that would kill us. We wouldn't survive on the air. We had to get everybody and pull them in. And so the one great thing they had was that Eric and his team would write these great character dramas, which pull the general audience in. And then it was my job to pull in the comic book people, because I knew that like the back of my hand, and I made sure that it felt like a Marvel comic book the way I had it designed, storyboarded, comic book angles and cameos to try and pull in those kids into the show. And so
there's very clearly your DNA in that intro there, you talking about being such a comic book fan and knowing the lore and knowing the material. And it's something in particular that even as a kid, because when you're a kid, you can't pay attention to what's going on in math class, but you're detail oriented about your comic books and your trading cards and your baseball teams and whatever. Yeah. And in particular, Wolverine, Gambit, and the Beast all have their comic book title logos.
Yes.
And I always loved that. It felt like, oh, okay, there's a reverence for what is going on. And that Gambit title logo is brand new. That Wolverine one's from the 80s, that Beast one is from the 70s, but it all still feels like it's in the moment right there.
And with some of those logos, though, when I called, it was, I think it was Bob Harris, was the story editor back then, and I called him, it's like, I need these logos, and some of them weren't designed. And this is back during fax machine days, okay?
Sure.
There was no internet stuff, so the ones that they had logos of, they sent it to us, and I had it, retraced so that it was nice and clean, because it was a fax machine. But like Storm, Jubilee, Professor X, Jean Grey. I just had to make them up.
Yeah.
I had no choice. I had to make up new logos and send it out.
Conversely, and then Buzz, I have a question for you in a moment. A couple of years ago when we all did an animation panel together, I brought up the Fantastic Four that you worked on, and I absolutely adored that cartoon. And it is one of the best Jack Kirby love letters that I've ever seen. And the intro, and it's specifically the season 2 intro, where it's just all of these different famous Kirby FF moments, where the Doctor Doom moment in there, all of it. What was that like for you, getting to bring all that to life in a way that it had never been before, especially for the Fantastic Four, which seems to struggle, Larry?
Oh,
That was for you.
Oh,
I have a question for you next, Buzz. I said that.
that was
Yeah.
Buzz.
No, that was for you.
Okay. One of the reasons I left the X-Men in year 5 was because Marvel gave me a call that season 1 of the FF they were not happy with, and so they wanted me to do the season 2 what I did
Brilliant.
for the X-Men. So I had, in moving over to, I think it was New World Pictures or something, New World, something like that. I had 3 conditions. I said, 1, like they have a little bit more money, and they give me a little bit more money. 2, I told them I wanted to do classic stories, the classic Jack Kirby stories of those days. And the 3rd was I told them, I want you to leave me alone, because I know what I'm doing, so don't bother me, because I want to try and do the shows like the way I did the X-Men. They agreed to it. So that's when I moved over, and we got a chance to do a lot of the classic stories. The introduction of the humans, the very first animated Black Panther.
Yeah.
And
You specifically adapted A Blind Man Shall Lead Them, which is one of my favorite FF stories, and I love how you pulled it off like perfectly.
oh, thanks. It was one of the classic stories that I wanted to bring all of those stories to life.
Yeah.
And I was really happy that I was given free reign to do it exactly like the books were. And I tried to incorporate a lot of Kirby equipment so that it looked like a Jack Kirby machine that in different places. Like I think there's an opening shot where you see, I took a classic, the thing's holding up this gigantic piece of whatever Kirby tech, and I put that into the show. I tried to take panels from the comic books and put it into the show. And I had help from a friend of mine named Mark Lewis, who helped me to do a lot of cleanup on some of those props and stuff to make sure. But I had to design it in such a way that it didn't animate, so it was just a single shot. That's it. But it came across. You could see that I was paying homage to what was done, the Century Sinister, stuff like that. We just adapted those books, and I was putting out my best fanboy director stuff and putting it out there for the world to see. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I love that cartoon. I definitely feel like it's kind of one of the unsung Marvel cartoons. So anytime I can talk about, especially that season 2, anytime I can talk about that, I'm very happy.
Yeah, so I enjoy it, and I try and tell people, go to season 2. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're a comic book fan, go to season 2, because I think in season 1, the one thing I saw in the beginning was, so Mariner and a Human Torch were fighting underwater with each other, and then after that little conflict, you pull back and you're on like a Dick Cavett show, and they're on a talk show. It's like, oh, that's not the FF, no. And that's what season 1 was more about, and what we did.
Buzz, talking about Kirby, I want to talk about Thundarr a little bit.
Okay.
What was it like getting to work with Jack on a show like that? That was Steve Gerber as well, correct?
Yes. This happened just before the internet started breaking big. This is back even before BBS systems. Okay. So I knew Jack Kirby by name. I knew his art. I knew his stories, but I had never seen a photo of Jack Kirby. I had no idea who Jack Kirby looked like. And when we were starting to put Thundarr together, Steve told Joe Ruby, says, I know an artist who would probably be really good in this show. And Joe said, we'll bring him around and we'll talk to him. So when we had our first official production meeting for the show, I come into the conference room, and John Dorman was already there. John Dorman was the head of the storyboard department at Ruby Spears. John was like one of the original wild men of Hollywood. We could spend the entire convention swapping John Dorman stories. But anyway, John was there, and he was talking to this little old man and literally, this man had a twinkle in his eye. You've heard that expression. This is the only person I've ever met whose eyes literally twinkled, lit up. And he's talking to him, and he doesn't introduce him to me, and I sit down, and gradually people, one by one, are drifting in. And I figure, well, when Joe gets here, we'll probably have a round of introductions so that everybody knows who everybody is, and then we'll start talking about Thundarr. Joe comes in, no round of introductions. We just start talking about Thundarr. So, you know, we're kicking ideas around, and very quickly I've come to realize this little old guy here, he is brilliant. He's got these really great ideas, and he's describing things and suggesting things. And we're hitting it off, interacting with each other really well. I was thinking, boy, it's going to be good working with this guy because he really knows his stuff. So when the meeting ends, Joe tells the writers staff, okay, you guys go to your office and start generating some story ideas. And the art department, you guys start, doodling some stuff. And the little old man said, I'll be back next week with some design work. So we all go to our offices, and I drop by Steve's office, and I say, I'm really excited about this. It sounds like a great show, but who was the guy in the office? Nobody introduced me. And he said, that was Jack Kirby. And I tell people I was friends with Jack Kirby before I knew he was Jack Kirby.
Did you feel like there was, I don't want to say an intimidation, but almost a level of really having to meet an expectation, knowing everything that Jack had done previously?
If I had known it was Jack Kirby, my contribution to the meeting would have been but Jack and Roz were just two of the sweetest people you'd ever hope to meet. Jack, just enormously creative. I wrote a script where Thundarr and Ariel and Ukla are on a raft ferry crossing a river. And I'm envisioning this like the Old West raft ferries. It's just a bunch of logs together with a rope, and you get on it and you pull yourself across the river. And I write the script, I give it to Jack. Jack comes back with some design work on it. And his version of the raft ferry is a aircraft carrier flight deck on top of sequoias. And I took one look at this and I said, we are not wasting this in a background shot for a single scene. We are going to build a whole episode around this. And I wrote Treasure of the Mox, which focused on that, made that the centerpiece of the story. And that was one of our better episodes, I feel. And that was typical of what Jack would do. You'd give him a little something, and you give him a little grain of sand, and he comes back with this big gleaming diamond. I mean, it was just great working with him.
We've got about, I want to say 10 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions from the audience? Not everybody at once.
There's a little bit that's in this going.
Yeah.
Well, let me interject something here because the GoBots have been invoked.
I did need to say, from a childhood standpoint, having the Transformers and the GoBots sitting next to one another is something that has been fighting inside of me to bring up, and I love that you just did that, so thank you.
I was considered the giant robot nut at the time. When I started working at Filmation, the Shogun Warrior toys came out. And I was part of a group called the Cartoon Fantasy Organization that was bringing in these pirated Japanese anime with giant robots. So I was seeing Mazinger and things like this. And I just recognized that, first of all, the quality of storytelling was much higher than in American cartoons. But giant robots are just cool, okay?
Absolutely.
And so everywhere I worked, I tried to persuade people to do a giant robot show. I wrote a couple of episodes of Tarzan and the Super 7, and one that I wrote, I had a giant robot in it. And Filmation's design staff, even though I gave them examples of Mazinger and things like that, they just stovepipe arm robot. Yeah. Anyway, everywhere I go, I'm always pitching a giant robot show, and everybody's just saying, Buzz, shut up. So we get called into a staff meeting in Joe Ruby's office, and these guys from Hasbro are there, and they've got a suitcase. And they put the suitcase down on the table in front of Joe, and they open it up, and it is filled with Japanese Transformer toys. And I'm looking at this, and my eyes are going big. And they're saying, yeah, we're gonna build a show. We've got the license to do the toys. We're not gonna do the characters of the toys the way that they were done in Japan. We're gonna rename them, recolor them, do them all brand new, all different ways. And I'm going like this. And finally the meeting ends, and they go off with their big box of toys. And they had been hitting every animation studio in town, including our rivals across the street, who independently came up with GoBots. But anyway, so the moment they were out of the studio, I said, Joe, we have got to get on this project. This is gonna be big, it's gonna be huge, trust me, just believe me, you want to get involved in this. And Joe said, nah, I got a better idea. We're gonna do a show about a teenage boy turns into a car.
Oh.
And I said, and then what? He turns into a parking lot? And he wasn't joking. He comes up with Turbo Teen. And people point to Turbo Teen as proof of how cocaine permeated Hollywood. No, Joe was just bat shit crazy. And that's what he would think all the time. Anyway, somebody, not me, comes up with the Bible for Turbo Teen, and we have a meeting, and Joe tells us what the show is, and he gives us the Bible, says, go to your offices and come back with some story ideas. So I go in, I get about halfway through the Bible, I toss it into the trash can. I go back to Joe and I say, Joe, I'll develop some ideas for you if you could explain a few things about this show. If the kid is a car and they take off his wheels and he turns back into a kid, is he missing his hands and feet? If the kid is a car and they take the battery out and he turns back into a kid, is he missing his heart? If the kid is a car and they put a suitcase in his trunk and he turns back into a kid, and Joe said, I am putting you on another show.
It's magic.
I just got the signal that we have to wrap up because we have the auction happening in here next. And I honestly feel like that is the perfect anecdote to end on. Eric, Julia, Buzz, and Larry, thank you so much for being here. And thanks for allowing me to be a small part of this.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Larry, thank you so much, man.
Larry, always good to see you.
Always.